this fifth generation, and I don't know what it is. It's almost like this institutional generation, but the institutional generation isn't acting like any of the previous generations. They don't care about op return. They don't care about whether core is private or not. They're speaking to their advisor and they're buying through an ETF or they're buying MicroStrategy, and they're not embedding in the actual culture.
Yes.
And they probably won't, because it probably won't suit them, because they're not buying peer-to-peer freedom money. They're buying an asset class.
Yeah.
And I think you can see that in the podcast scene, in that what new people have come on the scene in this like latest generation.
Yeah.
If you think you got your Lynn Aldens, et cetera, in 2021-ish, and Michael Saylor in 2021-ish, who's come in this generation? And
it's all treasury companies.
Yeah, but it's like, what new people?
I think there are two things that you touched on that are important, and they're related issues. So you have the number go up crowd, the treasury companies, the ones that are going and will be gobbling up lots. You have the ETFs doing effectively the same thing. Yeah. And we talked about this a couple of years ago at this point on your podcast. I think I said, do you ever feel like everybody's going to be rich and depressed because the number went up, but the project failed? I think that's a very real open question at the moment. And then on the tech side, we have a lot of new developers and a lot of ideology-based arguments that are expressing through very real like technical parameters with engineers and developers that have been working on this a long time, and a lot of folks that are new and were simply not around for the block size wars. With both of those issues, and I don't want to talk my own book like too much. Both of those issues can only be solved through elevating Bitcoin culture and teaching people the historical context of what happened in the block size wars, why people came and supported this project during like the most fragile years around the libertarian ideology, around building a parallel system. You can't fix the banks, you can't solve those political issues, but you can build a parallel system that's separate and distinct. These are attacks, those two buckets. Like number go up technology via the corporate treasury has tremendous benefits, but there are also concerns that people should be educated on the full scope of the conversation. Same thing is true with Bitcoin core development at the moment.
I think you can compare it. There's like a historical comparison to this as well. I was with our buddy Alex Thorne this morning. I was talking about it to him, and I've talked about it on my pod a lot recently.
Love Alex. Is he coming tonight?
I hope so.
Yeah, he'll probably be here. He's always here.
He'll be here.
And so I was talking about how I'm trying to understand the problems of the UK at the moment. I've spent a lot of time in US history. I've been reading the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence. I talked to you about this in Norway. And what's really interesting and impressive in America is that respect of the history of the founding of America, the Republic, the forefathers. You see it in films like Kindergarten Cop, where the kids literally are playing the performance of
such a great movie.
I love that movie. But I think that's the first place I actually saw the way the history is respected. You have like the little kid kind of dressed up as a forefather stepping forward. What did they say? 4 4s and 74 or whatever they think they say is. But like you teach and you honor and you respect the history of the founding of America and what the forefathers did. Yet, how many politicians are of the same character of those people? Bearing in mind,
many of them hate them.
Well, of course, because George Washington could have been king and he declined the power because he said it's better to have a republic.
No, we'd rather talk about whether or not they were slave owners than
there's the hypocrisy.
But more importantly, do you know where he did that? A couple blocks down here called France's Tavern, which is where we're going to go drink after.
Let me just finish my point. But yes, they were slave owners, and there's a hypocrisy in the Declaration of Independence because life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness unless you're a slave. Right. You're like, there was a hypocrisy there. I get it. And I understand the historical context. It's like, look, we need to get over the line with this constitution. But the point is that despite their hypocrisies and some of them being slave owners, they knew the risks of power, centralized power in government, and they wanted to fight against it, right?
Yeah.
They understood that. And whilst Americans celebrate their history and their independence and kicking our asses, at the same time, you have not elected people of the same character. I struggle to find one person outside of Ron Paul who has that character.
Yeah.
And so essentially, you've not carried through that culture. That culture has died. And if you don't respect and understand history, you're set to make mistakes. And I compare that to what's happening in Bitcoin right now, is in that we should have this culture of decentralized peer-to-peer money. The separation of money state, empowering people with better money. But what's happening is the number go up industrial complex is a different culture based on greed, which is fine. Capitalism is greed, but it is based on greed. It's based on risk. And there are people that we know and respect who have changed their position. They're now encouraging people to buy a share instead of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I'm not to say, look, maybe Rail Bedford would do that. Potentially that's an opportunity. But in doing so, we're compromising the historical context. We're forgetting the history of the block size wars, what people fought tooth and nail for, and we're losing that culture. And if we lose that culture, what does that mean down the line? May a fork come that comes easier because there isn't that line that's being held now by people. And as an outsider, as someone who's pulled away and seeing other people pull away, I think that is a risk now in Bitcoin. That culture seems to be going.
Just real quick.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
because a lot of us, a lot of the people who care and have the knowledge and were there, have fucked off. It's been a really long slog. Like, there are not a lot of people that have done the Bitcoin thing. The effect that it has on, friends and family relationships, the effect that it has on individuals psychologically. These were shit show years for a really long time. And for somebody to go all in and cover the social, economic, and technical aspects of Bitcoin and immerse themselves, it's stressful. So a lot of people are either burned out or they're simply tired and, retired. So, carrying that torch for future generations, you referenced the American thing, but, I believe it was right after the founding of the Department of Education, they scrapped civics classes, right? So there was institutional knowledge that was being passed on, and this was taught in schools. Today, if you talk to somebody in New York, they have no fucking idea who their city councilman is or their representation at a state level, and probably have a really surface level view of even how it works on a federal level.
But this is because I know you were going to speak, but this is the point I was trying to make, is that the baton got handed down. I joined during the block size wars, and I was like, oh yeah, I mean, a bigger block size, means lower transaction fees. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, smaller blocks means more decentralized. I didn't know, and essentially I went into it, got beaten up by a few people, and finally learned the error of my ways. What
is an expo?
It's a bar at the Rail Bedford ground. By the way, I know what an extended PubKey is. I know. But I got beaten up, and it was Shinobi basically did his finishing move on me, kicked the fuck out of me on it, and I finally understood why decentralization is important, why block size, keeping the block size down is important. I understood all this, and I'm one of as the early 2009 cypherpunks disappeared, they handed the baton on to the libertarians, and the libertarians handed the baton on to the macro people, and the macro people handed the baton on to the finance people. But this micro strategy generation aren't taking the baton, and our generations are 4 years, that tour of duty, that first 4 years, our generations are 4 years in Bitcoin, and we're, barely 8 years from the block size wars. And who's the baton going to? It's going to the number go up industrial complex, which to me is analogous to what's happened with the governance of the US, what's happened to with your federal government. And are we going to end up with a similar greedy federal government who basically cares more about BlackRock, ETFs, and MicroStrategy and the treasury funds than actually what the mission was?
Yeah.
And so your thesis of us getting rich and being depressed, I think we're on track.